Hi, welcome to the wave practice calculation videos. This is part 2 where you're going to be calculating the speed of a wave using its frequency and wavelength and vice versa. So at the top you have your magic triangle for those equations. You also have your units and symbols that will be helpful. So just like you did in part 1, for each section there will be a question and you are going to fill out the formula that you're using. You're going to show your setup and you're going to provide answers with units. I got started on this a bit and then I decided, you know what, let me just show you how to do it. So here we go. Okay, so in this very first example, just like for the first example above, there is not really a word problem, you're just filling in key information. So here, velocity or wave speed, they're the same thing. Speed and velocity are the same thing. That's your question mark, that's your unknown. Then over here, the wavelength they gave you was 56 meters and the frequency is 4 hertz. So I'm going to pause the video for a second to remind you what frequency, wavelength, and mean. So recall from last week that you learned that the wavelength is the distance between either two crests or two troughs. So that sort of shows you the length of a wave. And the frequency is the number of waves that pass a given point in a certain amount of time. So the shorter the wavelength, the more waves can pass by, the higher the frequency. And that relates to speed because the more waves that can pass by in a given amount of time, that faster that wave is traveling. So let's go back here and let's get started. So we have our velocity, we're looking for our velocity, we're looking for the speed of the wave, we have the wavelength and the frequency. So remember for the magic triangle, whatever you're looking for, you're going to cover that. Oops. So I'm going to cover the velocity there, and that means that I'm left with the frequency and the wavelength. And the wavelength has this weird symbol, by the way. It's called lambda. It's a Greek letter, so it looks like a person walking. So the frequency times the wavelength, since they're next to each other, I'm going to multiply them. So let me just put the multiplication x in the middle. Okay, so now I know what math I'm doing. Okay, over here for my setup, I'm going to take my the information that I'm given, and I'm also going to plug it into the equation that I have. So in this case, I am given the wavelength, and for that, we're going to use this lambda symbol. Now, you can get that symbol if you go to Insert, Special Characters, and you can either type in lam, start typing it in, and it'll appear there, okay, lambda. Or if you want, you can also try drawing it. So if I try to draw it, you know, there's a version of it here. It's not the best way of doing it, but that's an option. Sometimes it's easier than remembering the symbol is called lambda. So I'm just typing it in, I can do that. The other way that you can do this is, instead of inserting it yourself, is you can just copy the lambda symbol from the page. So I'm just going to copy this one here. Control C, Control V. All right, so I got my wavelength is equal to 56. Now for my frequency, it's 4. So 4 hertz. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug these numbers into this equation. So I'm going to rewrite this equation, V equals, but instead of putting in my variables, I'm going to put in the numbers. So for frequency, oops, I forgot to write 4. Frequency is 4 hertz. So I'm going to do 4 times 56, okay? So that's the math I'm doing. I plugged in for F, I plugged in 4, and for the wavelength, my lambda, I plugged in 56. All right, now I can go ahead and go to my calculator, 4 times 56. Let me go ahead and clear that. And 224 is the value that I have, so I'm going to write that down. So my speed is 224, but remember 224 what? So over here I'm going to write my final answer. I just got to rewrite it, but I have to make sure I have to put the units. So my units for speed or velocity is meter per second. So m over s. I also got one more example together, and then you're going to do the last two on your own. So the next one is actually a word problem, so I'm going to underline key information as I go. An earthquake S wave is moving at a speed of 125 meters per second with a frequency of 450 hertz. What is the wavelength? So what's key information here? I'm given the speed, 125 meters per second. I'm given the frequency, 450 hertz, and I'm looking for wavelength is my unknown. Okay. So now that I have that information, that's going to help me with finding out my equation, because remember, for that, my unknown is wavelength. I'm going to cover wavelength. Remember, wavelength has that weird lambda, looks like a person walking symbol, so that's the one I'm going to cover. And what I'm left with is V over F, okay? So when I cover that, I get V over F. And so that means that my wavelength, and again, I'm going to copy that symbol, Control C, just highlight it, Control C, Control V, is equal to, okay, if we go back up here, V over F. So it's going to be V over F. And that, remember, is speed over frequency. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and plug in on this side what's my speed, what's my frequency. So starting with my speed, I'm using the symbol V for speed. Speed and velocity are the same thing in these examples. Speed is equal to 125 meters per second. Okay, that's separated by a comma. And then my next known is frequency. F is equal to 450 hertz. Okay. All right, so now I just need to plug these numbers into this equation. So once again, I'm going to copy my wavelength symbol. Wavelength is equal, and then it's going to be the V first, so 125. 125 divided by frequency 450. Okay. And go over to my calculator here. 125 divided by 450. Divide 125 divided by 450. Okay, and I get this value here. 0.2777 keeps going. So I'm going to cut it off between the first 7 and the second 7. So 0.28 is what I'll get. All right, so now when I put my answers in, I have to make sure I do it with the units. So I'm going to do 0.28, and then my units here are going to be for my wavelength. Since it's wavelength, remember wavelength is meters. So I go back up to the table to help me with my units if I need to. Okay, so that is it for this video. You're going to do that for the last 2 problems and then submit it. All right, hope you found this video helpful. Have a quality day.